welcome to our webinar today. My name is Nelly, now with the moderator on behalf of the Prep Advisor team. I'm here today with Dr. Don Martin, who is the founder of Grad School Roadmap, and he has spoken to and helped prospective graduate students from all around the world. He has also done numerous webinars with us, sharing his experience and tips, and we are very happy to have him again here today talking about MBA and master's interviews. Don, I'll give you the word just in a sec. Before that, I want to tell everyone who is listening, you can ask questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A box. We will take time to answer at the end of the session. All questions are welcome, so don't hesitate. Everything is set now. Don, I'm giving the word to you.
Nelly, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be back with the Advent Group, with Udemy Prep, Access MBA once again for another webinar regarding such important aspects of someone's graduate school or MBA aspirations. First of all, Nelly never asks me to say this, but I want to say how excited I am and how honored I am to work with this group, with Nelly and with her team. This is an outstanding organization. I've actually had the privilege of participating in some Access MBA events over the years, and I love what this group does. And you're very fortunate to be affiliated with any part of the Advent Group. And I'm, again, delighted to be here. We're going to talk today about something that I believe is so important as part of someone's master's or MBA application process, and that is doing the application interview. Now, in the case of MBA programs, as I'm sure most of you know already, interviews are often by invitation only once you've applied. They don't give every applicant the opportunity to have an interview. I'm disappointed that things have moved in this direction. Back when I'm going to let you read the little bit of information about my background here, but as you'll see on this slide, one of the institutions I served was the Chicago Booth School of Business. And when I was there for 11 years, and we interviewed any applicant who wished to have an interview as part of his or her application process. That is no longer done very often. There are very few schools that interview every single applicant anymore. I think that's a shame, but that's the reality. However, many MBA or master's applicants do get invited to do an interview. And if this happens, this is a very, very critical component of your application. And that's why I want to spend some time sharing with you some what we might call insider tips or insider information based on my many years being involved with and actually conducting application interviews. And now, in my role with Grad School Roadmap, the company I founded in 2008, I actually do all kinds of practice interviews with my clients all the time. I just did one, I did two of them just within the past week. So just a quick look at this slide. I think the thing I'd like to share, two things I'd like to share most is I've sat in your shoes twice. I earned a master's degree and then a PhD. So I was a prospective graduate student twice. I've been where you're sitting. It was both exciting and a little scary at the same time for me. And if that's what you're feeling, you're in very good company. It is a little daunting, and yet it's exciting. And my two master's programs were the two of the most incredible, or my two graduate programs were the two most incredible experiences of my entire life. I have no desire to do a third one, but I would do those two again, given the chance. They were amazing. And so that's one thing I wanted to say. Secondly, during my 28 years working in higher ed, in enrollment management, student services, admissions, I actually evaluated over 125,000 applications. That was over that 28-year period. I don't say that to brag, but rather to let you know that as a dean of admissions for all those years, and as someone evaluating applications and making decisions, I was often in the final decision maker on many of the applications. That was certainly the case at Booth. I made final decisions on all MBA applications, and there were over 80,000 of them in my 11 years there. So this information is coming to you from my background as well as from my book, which I've written. It's in its second printing right now. I'll spend about truly 30 seconds toward the end of the presentation letting you know about my book if by any chance that would be of interest. So that said, what are we going to cover today? I'm quickly going to cover in 30 seconds a little bit more information about Grad School Roadmap, which is the organization I founded. Then we're going to spend the most of our time talking about two individuals that are involved in the interview that takes place, the application interview. One is you. We call you the interviewee. But there's also another person there, and they're critical, obviously, and that's the interviewer. That's the person interviewing you. And I want to share some tips with you both about you as the interviewee before your interview, during and after, and the interviewer before, during, and after. Then I'll have some closing tips. As I said, I'll take about 30 seconds to say something about my book, and then we're going to get into Q&A. And I want to echo what Nellie said. If you have any questions, I love questions. That's my favorite part of any webinar I ever do, is answering your questions. There are no bad questions. There are no dumb questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box. And Nellie has very kindly offered to come back at the end and manage those questions. So please take the time to do that. All right, let's jump in here. What is Grad School Roadmap, the organization I'm currently with? We are a boutique grad school admissions consultancy, basically. We work with all kinds of graduate students, many MBA, a large number. We also work with quite a few PhD candidates, Master of Arts, Master of Science, law school, medical school, veterinary school, physician assistant programs, just a host of individuals we have coached. Actually, this slide I'm going to need to update because in the final bullet point, we've actually gone up over 900 individuals now that we've worked with over the past 16 years, and 97% of them have been admitted to one or more of their graduate school choices. So again, I believe this provides a little credibility for the information that I'll be sharing with you now. Okay, first of all, you as an interviewee, as you get ready for your interview, leading up to it or before, the first tip I'd like to give you is prepare, prepare, prepare. Make sure you know that you have everything in order. As you'll see here, things to verify. If you don't have them ahead of time, you should get information about this in your confirmation of the interview, but make sure you have all of this information that you know about going in. Be prepared ahead of time. Additionally, be sure you know about the program you're interviewing for. Be sure that you are not thinking of this more in general terms, but this is a specific interview with a specific organization or educational institution. And therefore, you want to be very familiar with their program so that if you are asked questions or if you are given the chance to ask questions at the end of the interview, you're ready to ask some specific questions that show you did your research. Obviously, some other things here. Make sure you have your resume ready, that you refamiliarize yourself with any essays you wrote for this particular institution. You could be asked something about one of those essays. Make sure that you have practiced some of your responses to some of the questions that you might be asked. This is something you should be doing ahead of time, again, as you prepare. But be careful that when you practice your responses, you do not memorize them. This is not something where you want to sound as if you are reading from a script. This interview is the chance for you to let the individuals interviewing you, or if it's one person, let them get to know you in a very calm and, what should we say, transparent way. So memorizing an answer, I'm going to try to give you an example of this. What if when I first was introduced this morning to you by Nellie, I said, "Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking the time." You would immediately have a negative reaction to that. You would start thinking, my gosh, he sounds like he's reading off of a prompter, or he's reading something that he memorized. No, no, no. This, in all honesty, as you practice the responses for the questions you might be asked, your response should never be identical. It should not be the same every time. It's going to be a little different. I don't, the webinars that I present for the Advent group, for Unimi Prep, for Access MBA, the webinars I present, no two are identical. They're similar, but they're not identical. So if you find that your answers to questions that you're practicing are the exact same response, you're too memorized. That's a little too much. So be careful that you have an idea of it. It's like in your mind, you have an idea. Okay, if I'm asked this question, this is what I'm going to say, but not if I'm asked this question, here are the exact words I will use. That's the difference. Okay, so be careful there. Obviously, as you're getting ready for this interview, make sure that you are prepared in terms of your attire, your personal appearance. That makes a huge first impression. The first time someone sees you, if your hair isn't combed, if your shirt or blouse isn't buttoned properly, if you look like if you're wearing something that looks like you came from the gym, that's going to be extremely negative for you as a first impression. Obviously, make sure if you're doing this virtually or by phone, make sure that you're taking that into account so that you're adequately prepared. Those are some tips for you as you prepare beforehand for the interview. Now, something to keep in mind: even if you prepare, there's no one actual way that institutions or programs will conduct interviews. You can't predict everything that's going to happen. You can have a general idea, but again, don't get so practiced that you are taken aback or thrown off if someone doesn't do something you were expecting them to do, or something happens. You need to be prepared, but you also need to be ready to adapt if something comes up so that you're not caught off guard. I just wanted to share that. One school will interview one way, another school, again, they'll be similar, but they won't be identical, and there may not be, everything may not be able to be predicted ahead of time. Again, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A box. All right, now, during the interview, I should have put this first one back under the other slide, but make sure that you are ready, that if you needed to use the restroom, that's done, so that when you get there, and you should try to arrive a little early, make sure you turn off your phone right beforehand, so that doesn't cause a distraction or disturbance. And if you need to, bring your resume with you. Bring some copies of your essays and a notepad. You may decide to take some notes while you're speaking with, especially when you get to the point where you're asking some questions, if you're given the chance to do so. So you want to be prepared. You want to show the interviewer that you came ready to go with what you thought you would most want and need to complete the interview. Secondly, in terms of during this interview, please be ready for feelings of being nervous. Do you know, even after all the years that I have done presentations of this kind, whether it's been virtually or in person, there's a little sense of nervousness that I experience almost every time right before I speak. And what I believe that generally means is that you want to do a good job. You realize in a situation like this, in an application interview, you realize that you are going up against other applicants. And not everyone who receives an interview is going to be admitted. There's going to be a selection process there. And the more, what's the word I'm looking for? The higher one of these programs is on your priority list, Let's say you have a rank order by the time you've submitted your applications, and one of these or two of these programs are the top two for you. Of course, you're going to be even a little more nervous because you want to do well. You want it to go well, but just know you're in good company. That's why I put here, join the club. We are all usually nervous at some point before we get ready to speak or put ourselves out there in some ways. Remember, first impressions are, this quote is not original with me. There are two of them I'll share with you. First impressions are lasting impressions. They are. And they've done studies. Psychologists have said if someone has a positive impression of you as a first impression, it will take many, many negative impressions after that to change their impression. So my second quote is, you do not get a second chance to make a first impression. So be ready, be professional, shake the person's hand. If they extend their hand to you, or you can extend yours to them, you can shake their hand, look at them. When I do interviews, I am very much aware of the eye contact of the individual I'm meeting with. Are they looking like this? I'm doing this because some applicants I met with, they would either look away or they would look up at the ceiling. I used to think, what's so important on the ceiling? Or if I was here, they would be looking just to the right or just to the left of me. I kept wanting to go over like this so I could catch their eye. If you don't maintain good eye contact, that can send a signal that you're either not very confident or you're not very trustworthy. So be sure to make, now you don't need to stare like a zombie, but my guideline, usually when I'm speaking with individuals on my computer screen, if this is virtual, that is, there's a little green dot that turns on when my microphone or when the camera is on, excuse me. And so I look at that. I don't look down here at the screen where this is where you probably see your slide. I'm not looking there. If I'm looking there, I'm not looking at you. I'm looking up here. Do you notice the difference? I'm looking in my camera so that you get a sense that I'm looking at you. That's very important. Make sure to thank the interviewer for their time. There could be some preliminary small talk. They might not. Some interviewers kind of want to get right into it. They want to say, okay, let's go. We're going to get started. Others, I enjoyed having at least a minute or two, well, some small talk. Just, how's your day? How about this weather? Or if something happened in that you know of in their country or in their city where they are, you could talk about those things. Lastly, let the interviewer have charge of the way the interview goes. Don't yield to the temptation to jump in and try to control what's happening. That will not serve you well. You need to let them have that opportunity. And as I said earlier, you may or may not have the opportunity to ask some questions. But if you do, remember what I said earlier, do your research on that program so that the questions you're asking are very, very good. In other words, you don't want to ask a question for which the response is very readily apparent on the website or somewhere in written information you've received about this program. If you ask a question and the response of the interviewer in their mind is, why are they asking this question? We have this all over the website. That's not, your questions need to show you did some research and maybe you want to know a little more about something you read, but not initially what would already be provided on the internet or in other written information. Okay, so those are a couple of things to keep in mind during the interview. Now, here's another one. Be mindful of how long your responses are. This is very important. Let's say I would estimate, now this is there's a wide range, but on average, most interviews last between 20 and 30 minutes. That's about it. The more you talk, the less questions you're going to have a chance to answer. I should say, the more you focus on one answer and keep it. I had an interview one. Now, this didn't happen very often, but I had an interview with a student. I asked one question. They talked for the rest of the interview. I never had a chance to ask another question. That interviewee was not admitted. It was clear that they had no idea when to stop. So when you're asked a question, I would say 1 to 2 minutes. You don't want to answer it with one word or one sentence either. Of course, that's too short. But you do want to answer it. I would say 1 or 2 minutes is probably an appropriate length to answer most of the questions. That way, the interviewer can ask you more questions. And you know what else we found? The more questions you get to answer, the more comfortable you become, the less nervous you become. You become a little more yourself as you go along. Excuse me, I'm going to just grab some water here. All right, so just be careful that you adequately answer the questions, but don't go overboard. Try to be conversational. Try to picture yourself, although this could actually happen. Some institutions ask alumni to do interviews for them, and you might end up, instead of meeting them in their office, you might end up having coffee with them. You might meet at a cafe or a restaurant or a coffee shop. So, but you want to try to think about this as a conversation. You're meeting them. It would be like if you went out to eat and you saw a friend of yours and you went over and started talking with them. It's not terribly formal here. It's conversational. Something else you want to keep in mind. You may be asked, you could actually be asked a question. Tell me about an accomplishment you've had of which you're very proud. Go for it. Be ready to talk about your accomplishments. There's nothing. However, please keep in mind, there's a big difference between demonstrating confidence and demonstrating arrogance. And I believe admissions offices do a disservice to applicants sometimes because they talk about how you have to really promote yourself and you have to stand out and you have to be this. And it almost gives applicants the impression that they have to be superhuman and perfect and better than everyone else. And that is just not true. You need to be confident. When I told you earlier today in this webinar that I had evaluated over 125,000 applications during my 28 years working at Columbia, Chicago, Northwestern, and so forth, I could have said it this way. I have evaluated 125,000 applications during my career. I have a feeling that's more than anyone else. How would that make you feel? That would immediately cause you to think, boy, does he ever think a lot of himself, as opposed to just sharing. So if you're asked about an accomplishment, maybe you've been given an award, a promotion, something that I'm very proud of my 2 master's programs. I'm very proud of the work I did while I was evaluating applications as a dean of admissions. But confidence and arrogance are 2 different things. And as you practice your responses, and by the way, this is true in writing as well as in person. In your essays, make sure if they ask you for your achievements, your strong points, let them know what you think they are. But be very careful that you don't cross the line and sound like there's no one else is as good as you. That's when you hurt yourself. And if you're asked to discuss a weakness, be ready to do so. Now, keep in mind, the interviewer is not looking for past secrets or some horrible thing that you thought you may have done at some point growing up. Maybe you got in trouble for stealing, or maybe you beat up somebody and you got in trouble for that. No. We're not looking for, we've all made mistakes. If the doors were opened on any of our lives, we all have things we wish that were not part of our life. But we also have some weaknesses we can discuss. I'll give you an example of one of mine. I tend to be very impatient. I have a personality. I want to get things done. I want to, do it. I want to jump in, and I don't like to be deterred or slowed down. I don't like to be held back. And I get upset when that happens sometimes. If you ever took a driving trip with me, This is where I get to practice learning how to be more patient. I am not always the most patient driver. I get upset and I have to talk. Now, has this ruined my life? Has it ruined my... Another area that I have to be careful about is I can be very opinionated. I can be very opinionated to the point that sometimes I might make someone else feel like their opinion isn't worth anything. So these are things I have to work on, but they haven't ruined my life. But you better need to be prepared to discuss this and not feel like you were taken off guard or completely surprised when that question is asked. All right, now let's move to after the interview is over. Remember, your evaluation continues all the way through that interview, all the way through. And make sure that you remember you're being evaluated when you get there, when you're answering questions, and when you start asking questions. It's an evaluation all the way through. Next, make sure to thank the interviewer. Make sure that you thank them for their time and consideration. Make a smile. Do a confident handshake if the opportunity. Tell them, I so enjoyed speaking with you. If you feel that. Now, don't say that if it's not true. But if it is, and 9 times out of 10 it will be, tell them, I really enjoyed this opportunity with you. And then as soon as you get out of there, try to take some notes on your notepad to just remember some of what you believe were the key topics, discussions, how you felt about whatever, just so you have that as a reference if down the road anything would come up that you would want to talk about that. So take some notes afterward just for your own sake. Nobody else needs to see these, just you, to make sure you kind of remember. It could be that down the road you might have a chance to refer to something you said in your interview. So have some notes ready. The further out you get, the more you forget what happened. So take some notes on this as soon as the interview is over. I see we're getting some questions. This is wonderful. Please keep them coming. Also, as soon as you can after the interview, you want to send a thank you message, most likely an email message. This should be a very professional interview thank you message to them. You could also, you don't have to, but you could send a thank you message to the person who set this up. If it was other than the interviewer, if a member of the admissions staff set it up, you can always thank them. I'm often asked, what about a handwritten note? Well, they're not required, but I will tell you, in this day and age of email messages and such impersonal contact, a handwritten thank you note, if you have the mailing address of your interviewer, a handwritten note is also, it's not required. If you don't do a handwritten note, that's not going to hurt you, but it definitely helps. There's no doubt about that. You don't have to make this. In fact, I would suggest do not make this a long, drawn out message. Please don't do that. Make it short. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me on whatever. And I so enjoyed speaking with you. If something they said resonated with you, you could say, I really appreciated your comment about such and such, and it helped me to feel like I understand the program a little better. And then at the end of this message, if you feel that your interest, and please be honest, you're only hurting yourself if you don't do this, if you're not honest. But if after that interview, your interest in the program has gone up, say that. You could close, you could say, I just want you to know, as the result of this time together, my interest in this program has actually increased. Thank you again, sincerely, whatever. But that is very, very critical, again, that you do that. Okay, now I'm going to go back to this other slide for just a moment. I've now just given you some tips for what to be doing before the interview takes place, during the interview, and after it. I'm going to give you one other tip here, and I probably should add this to the slides at some point. If you feel that somehow you had a bad interview, it did not go well, not because of you, but because of something the interviewer did. If your interviewer is inappropriate in any way, if they swear during the interview, if they tell a joke that is not appropriate for a professional setting, if they in any way make some sort of a expression of interest in you, like for dating or something, anything like that, you need to report that immediately. I promise you, after 28 years as an admissions dean, sharing that information will not hurt you in any way whatsoever. What we often did, if this happened when I was at Chicago Booth or Columbia, wherever, Northwestern, we would have them do another interview. We would completely destroy. We wouldn't even look at the report from that interview. We would have them re-interview so that they felt that, sometimes interviewers misbehave, especially when it's alumni that have been out for a while and we don't have as much control over what they're doing as we do if we have students doing an interview, current students or admissions staff. So if that happens, be ready to say something about it if that is the case. Okay, now we're going to switch gears. We've talked about you as the interviewee, but now I want to give you some tips on something you probably won't hear anywhere else in this type of a webinar, and that is what's going on with your interviewer, with the person who's going to interview you. What is going on with them? Well, first, before the interview takes place, again, as I mentioned, it will either be one of three types of interviewers. It will be a member of the admissions staff, it will be a current student, or it will be an alumnus. I want to say right now, there is no difference in credibility with the admissions evaluators depending on who does the interview. In other words, the admissions staff person doing an interview, their report isn't more important than if an alumnus did it or a student. All reports are considered equally because of the second point here. They will, all of these groups will have received very extensive training on how to do this and what to do, what not to do, what happens if this occurs, all those, and this training is ongoing. For us at Chicago Booth, we did it every year with our students and with our alumni. They had to go through the training every single year. So they will be ready. And so therefore, with that kind of training, the reports are considered equally. It doesn't matter who conducted it. They will be considered. Now, by the time beforehand, your interviewer may, I would think, they will most definitely have looked at your resume for sure before they sit in this meeting with you. They won't just take it out when you get there and say, oh, let me take a look at this. No, they will have read your resume. And it's possible, if it's an admissions staff member, they may have seen other parts of your application. I doubt if a student or an alumnus would, but maybe the admissions person. And again, that doesn't affect the outcome of your interview in any way at all. But I just want you to know that most likely it will be your resume that any of these groups, staff, students, alumni, that will definitely have been read. Now, during the interview, please be assured and hopefully comforted that this person knows you're going to be nervous. We talked about this in our training, always. Be ready for the fact that this individual is coming in, and if it's their first choice, even if it isn't, maybe they haven't done as many interviews, but whatever, they're going to be nervous, and you need to be ready for that. So the interviewer is almost expecting that you're going to be a little nervous. And again, very much at the beginning. So that doesn't throw them off. That doesn't hurt you in any way at all. In fact, it probably endears you to them because they were sitting where you are at one point as an interviewee, and they know how that feels. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to send a bad impression. No. They're aware that, especially in the beginning, there's going to be a level of nervousness. Next, remember again what I said earlier. This is a conversation. This is not a formal inquiry with a group of legal experts where you're being asked to defend your research or talk about some lofty theories of some sort. No, this is a conversation with you. Now, again, what you say and how you say it certainly will not be lost on your interviewer. We have a saying in the United States, and maybe wherever you're tuning in from, you have it too. It's not always what you say, but how you say it that can make a big difference. And that's very true. So you need to be careful again. You want to be conversational, not too formal. You want to be what? Confident, not what? Arrogant. Very, very important. They will be observing your body language. Of course, as I said earlier, your eye contact. Are you able to look them in the eye? Again, not stare at them, but when you're, especially when you're speaking with them and when you're listening to them, are you engaging with them with your eye contact? Then there are some components of what they will probably most likely, excuse me, I'm not sure what's going on. I think I have a frog in my throat. There we go. There are three things for sure they're going to be evaluating. How well you know the program. What is your communication style? Sometimes we call that, what is your level of emotional intelligence? And would you be, if they were studying with you, if they were a fellow student of yours, would they want you in their program? In fact, to me, that point right there is probably the biggest outcome of your interview, is answering that question, the interviewer answering that question and telling the admissions committee, this is somebody I would love to study with. I'd love to have them in my cohort, in my student group. Or the opposite, don't admit this person. They were very arrogant. They just didn't look me in the eye. They seemed disinterested, whatever. So this is critical. That's what they're trying to determine is this someone we would want in our program? And remember, they absolutely want you to do well. This interview is not for the purpose of tripping you up, confusing you, making you overly nervous. My goal in my interviews was always, by the end, that individual felt so comfortable with me that it was like we'd known each other for a long time. My goal was to help them feel comfortable. Why? Because the more comfortable you feel, the more easy it is for you to share whatever it is you're being asked to share. So please remember, they know you're going to be a little nervous at the beginning, and most of all, they want you to do well. And lastly, they are trying to answer the question at the end of the day, is this person a good match for our program? All right, after the interview, they will prepare. Oh my word, we have more questions coming in. This is absolutely wonderful. Please keep them coming. Afterwards, the interviewer is going to prepare a written report that will obviously become part of your application. So just know that that's going to be now an added component of what the admissions committee or the admissions dean will see. In my case, at Chicago Booth especially, I asked that the interview report be placed in the front of the file so that it was the very first thing I saw. That's how important the interview was to me. If the interview didn't go well and I had every confidence in the interviewer that they had, and we got no complaints or anything, oftentimes someone was denied based on their interview report. That's all I needed to know. So that written report goes in your application. As part of the training for interviewers, we tell them, be brutally honest, one way or the other. Don't sugarcoat anything. Don't hide anything. If you believe this person just knocked it right out of the ballpark and got a home run, tell us. Or if you think they scored a big out, you need to tell us that too. Now, in most cases, after that interview is done, you will not have contact with your interviewer. And I would actually encourage you, unless it's some very unique circumstance, I would encourage you not to have contact with them. This is, you don't keep into, once you send that thank you note, that's it. You don't keep writing to them. You don't keep, that will hurt you. So you don't have contact with them. Again, they do appreciate being thanked. And by the way, I'm going to add something else here. If you get admitted to that program, send them a second thank you note at that time. Tell them, I want you to know I got in. Thank you so much for the time I had with you. I'm so excited. Let them know that. That is always something interviewers are very pleased to hear. So when that happens, you can thank them, after the initial interview, but also you can thank them a second time if you get admitted. Okay, our time is moving along. Here are a few types of interview questions. Now, again, there's such a large number, but here are some that you most likely will be asked in some way, shape, or form. Tell me about yourself. Again, they'll have read your resume, something there. They will definitely, I think, ask you why you're interested in that program, what your strengths and weaknesses are, your long-term goals. So these are some general, there could be other questions, but these are 5 of some of what I believe to be most often the question types that you will be asked in the interview. And just as a quick note, as I said, we conduct mock interviews at Grad School Roadmap. If that is something you're ever interested in learning more about, please let me know. I love doing interviews. It's our interview practice sessions, I should say. It's just so enjoyable. So if that's of interest, just let me know. Now, some final tips here as we go. The interview could be an individual or group session. It will most likely be conducted by staff, students, and I will need to add their alumni. First impressions on both. By the way, you're going to have a first impression of your interviewer too. And that could either help or hurt you in terms of how you think about that program. And that's okay. You need to be brutally honest with yourself about that as well. Again, how you present yourself, so important. And remember, the written report is going to be going in your file. Finally, final review here. Prepare, prepare, prepare. First impressions important. Remember to prepare your responses in practice sessions, but don't memorize. Go with the flow. Remember, these interview sessions are not identical. Be ready to adapt. Don't ramble with your answers, but don't be too overly short. Be comfortable talking about your strengths and your weaknesses. And of course, remember to say thank you. All right. One last thing. I said I'd spend about 30 seconds talking about my book. Here it is. That's what the cover looks like, except for that released in July 18th. I just put that on here. But that's the book in its 2nd edition now. And if you're interested, you can go on to the grad school. I'll give you my contact information in a second here. You can go to the Grad School Roadmap website, click the book page, and then if you decide to purchase and you use the promo code GSRM, you will get a 50% discount on the price of the book. So if it's only 105 pages, by the way, 4 chapters, starting out with doing good research on programs, the entire application process in chapter 2, how to succeed if you get in chapter 3, and some questions that many students ask at some point in their grad school journey and my responses to those questions. So if you're interested, go to the website, check it out. Now, here's my contact information. On the left is my email address. On the right is the website address for Grad School Roadmap. By the way, we have a phenomenal blog section, over 200 blogs on many different topics, including the master's application process, the MBA application process, law school, PhD, just a myriad of free information. So please don't hesitate to check out the website. In closing, or at least hang on there, because I see we have lots of questions. I'm going to stay on to try and answer all of them. But I just want to say thank you again for so kindly joining me today for this webinar, for this important information about the application interview. Nellie, I will be coming back on here now. Nellie, I want to thank you so much for facilitating all of this. It's such a pleasure working with you and your team. And I hope that this information has been helpful to our audience. We do have lots of questions, so I'm taking that as a good sign, and I will now turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much, Don. Indeed, we have a lot of questions, and I'm very, very happy, excited about them. Very interesting questions out there.
Good.
Before starting to read them, I saw a few questions about the recording of this webinar. We're going to share it with you tomorrow or maybe by the end of the week, together again with the contacts of Don Martin, of Dr. Don Martin, and his website, so you can check it yourself. Okay, let's see what we have here.
Okay.
Okay, what happens on the other side of the interview? There must be a form or something like that where the interviewer is checking box by box. If yes, what is being evaluated on this form?
Yeah, sometimes interviewers will just be asked to evaluate a candidate on a couple of areas and they just write their responses there. There's no boxes. In other instances, there will be there could be a statement that would say level of confidence during the interview. And then it would be superior, outstanding, good, fair, or poor. Presentation style. Were they comfortable? But were they also professional? Did they behave themselves appropriately? What do you think their level was of interest in our program? High, medium, or low? So sometimes they will fill in boxes, but most importantly, they are going to be asked to assess you on a couple of key areas. Your how you came across in that interview. Was it a positive impression or negative, and why? How did they feel you discussed certain questions you were asked? Did you seem to know what you were going to say? Did you answer the questions and not ramble? Did you sound rehearsed, or did you sound like you were prepared but not quite reading something off of a prompter? And of course, they're going to be asked some questions, as I said, around, is this someone we would want to have as part of our community? Is this individual someone we would want? Those are some of the main things. And sometimes there'll be boxes, other times it'll just be the interviewer writing things out.
Great. Okay, let's see. Some interviewers leave the starting point, the introduction of the interview, to the interviewee to be creative. What is the best way to structure a creative introduction?
In my humble, now you could get different responses to this question depending on who you ask, but for my purposes, be careful that you don't try to become too creative so that you start sounding like a clown, or like you're just being over the top. That never works. Err on the side of being upbeat, good eye contact, and if the interviewer says, why don't you start off our interview? What I would do is the following. I would say something like, let's say Nellie was my interviewer, and she said, Don, I'd like you to start off with however you want to start the interview today. I would say, well, thank you, Nellie. And first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I thank you so much for taking this time to meet with me. I'd like to share with you a little bit about myself that is not already apparent on my resume. And then share a couple of things about my background, an amazing life experience I've had, something that will help the interviewer get to know me better. That's what I would call being creative, is going outside of information that they already have, sharing. And again, don't get too personal, but I might say, I'm the youngest of 4 children. I'm the only one in my family who had the privilege to get a college education, and I'm so grateful for that. I've lived in the Midwest part of the United States for many years, and I now call Chicago my home. I've traveled to over 64 countries in my lifetime, and I love to sing. I love to sing. Those are things that the interviewer would not otherwise know about me, and it certainly serves as a great icebreaker at the beginning. It just calms things down. And then, so that would be my suggestion. Don't write poems. Some people will recite a poem, or they'll sing a song. I mean, it's just I could write a book at some of the interesting ways. And I know they were trying. I don't mean to put them down, but that's over the top. Just be upbeat, good eye contact. And my way of being creative is let them know something about you, couple things that would be nowhere else in your application. Good question.
Thank you, Don. That was a great example. Okay, we have questions here from someone who has already done a few interviews. Actually, he or she has been to a interview at a top school, I guess in the USA, I don't know. And they're saying that there were a lot of simple and normal questions, but they were asking in such a way, such a long, complex way that it was really difficult for them to understand what they're being asked for, like, you know, like a Shakespeare wrote the question or something like that. So this person is asking for advice, what to do in such a case when you cannot understand the questions. You already asked them to repeat it, but still cannot understand the question.
This is definitely something that happens. I'm so thankful that you felt the freedom to ask this, and I'm sorry if this was your experience with your interviewer. As I've said, some interviewers should not be interviewing. They don't quite, and for some reason, they are not caught. No one knows that this is going on. No one understands that this is the experience that they've had, that the interviewee has had with that person. So what all that you can do in a situation like that is, if you've asked them to rephrase the question or repeat the question, and you still are not quite sure, here's what I would do. I would probably say, thank you for repeating the question. I believe what you're asking me is this, and then respond. Just make sure that you tried to let them know that you were listening and you believe they were asking. You may not understand the whole part of the question, but if there's some part of it that at least you thought you understood, go with that and do your best. And this will be much easier said than done. But in that setting, the fault here is not with you. It's with the interviewer. They made the mistake. This isn't anything you did. And what you want to try to do is to maintain your composure, be positive, not arrogant, but confident and positive. Smile, look at them in the eye, and do your best to answer any part of what you thought you heard, even if you don't think you got it all. Don't say, oh, I'm so sorry. I probably didn't answer that right, or I didn't understand, or I probably missed something. Do not do any of that. Answer the best you can based on what you think you heard. And if you want to talk with me more about that, my contact information is here. Nellie's going to provide it later, but that's a great question.
Thank you very much, Don. Okay, next question. Usually you're given a chance to schedule your interview. What tips could you give us in setting the time? Is it the best if setting a time at the beginning of the day, the middle, or choosing the end of the workday? Does it affect the interview quality?
Well, again, these Nellie, you are right. These are outstanding interview questions. You're all asking great questions here. If it were me scheduling an interview, my very major preference would be in the morning between 9 a.m. and 12 noon, East Coast time or Central, whatever the time zone is, wherever you're interviewing, between 9 a.m. and lunchtime. People are generally a little more fresh in the morning. They've had their cup of coffee or their cup of tea or their Energizer drink or whatever, and they may have been to the gym before they went to work. And you're generally, as the worst time for me would be within an hour or two after lunch, because people slow down, they get tired. I would not want to do it then. And I would certainly not want to do it later in the day, because people just get tired. We have long days. We are, most of us, busy. We got a lot going on. We have a lot on our plates, a lot on our minds. So for me, again, generally speaking, if I were the one scheduling the time, I would schedule it for 9 a.m., 10 a.m., or 11 a.m. in the morning.
Great, thank you. Next question. Is it possible to have more than one person interviewing you? And if there are more than one person present in the session, what we should do? And is there something specific we should do in this situation?
Great question. Most likely, the only time you would be interviewed by a group tends to be when you're applying for a doctoral program. And at that point, you could be interviewed by several faculty members all at one time. As an MBA applicant, as a Master of Arts, Master of Science applicant, law school, medical school, yes, you might have a larger number, but most of the time it will be one person. However, if it is more than one, I don't believe you would handle yourself any differently. The only difference is it won't be just one person asking you the questions. It'll be two people or maybe three people, but you would prepare in the same way. You would conduct yourself in the same way. Obviously, you want to maintain eye contact with whoever it is you're engaging with at that point. And you want to do your best to answer the questions as you would have if it was just one person. So there's really no difference in terms of the usual format of the interview, if that happens. Great question.
Question from someone who maybe also done some interviews recently, and they're saying at the end of the interview there is this awkward moment that the interviewer has run out of the question. You're chatting informally to end the meeting, but you don't know if you are the one to end the meeting and say the last words. How should be the perfect interview concluded? That's the question.
Well, this is a phenomenal question. My first answer is there's probably not a perfect interview conclusion because we're all human beings, but there can be some good ones as opposed to some bad ones. So if you're at the end of the interview, the questions, they've asked you all the questions they were going to ask, you've had a chance to ask all the questions that you would like to ask, and they don't seem to be saying, you know, thank you, Nellie, thank you for your time, let's go. You could say, were there any other questions you wanted to ask me at this time? And if they say no, then you could say it's totally apart. Now, again, it's how you do this, but you could say, I probably need to get going for my next item on my schedule for today. Something very kind, not, well, I need to get going. Are we done here? I mean, of course, that just is the kiss of death. But if they're not taking the initiative, you can say, are there any other questions I could answer for you right now? And if they have one, go. But then you have every right to say, unfortunately, I probably need to get going or something. And you can say it with a smile, very low key, and that should take care of it. Good question. These are phenomenal. Nellie, I'm amazed. These are absolutely wonderful questions.
Yeah, we're actually running a little bit out of time now, but if you still have time for one or two questions.
I will answer whatever we have. Absolutely. If our students, looks like our participants are sticking with me, so I'm going to stick with them.
Okay, we have a question about body language. What body language would you note during an interview? If the interviewee does it in the meeting, what could be some body language tips that you could tell us from your experience?
Another great question. There are two things that immediately popped into my mind when the first is bad posture and, you know, slouching in the chair or, you know, oh, I'm sorry. I think I just, there we go. And I don't know what happened there, Nellie.
We can see your slides now.
You can see my slides. I'll just go back to this one. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, slouching in your chair, you know, sitting where your shoulders are bent down, or you look like you're, the other is covering your mouth when you talk. Some people, I don't know what it is, but they'll, you know, they have their hand around their mouth or they're touching their shoulders or something. They just, it makes you look jittery. Those two things are extremely dangerous. But the other thing is, depending on the distance between you and the interviewer, if there's a desk between you, a restaurant table, some sort of something where you're really separated, this would not be as likely to happen. But if you're sitting in a chair and they're sitting in a chair and you're kind of leaning into them, like you're right there in their space, be careful to give them their space. So those are some things where body language, also, crossing your arms like this. Many of us do that, but that can tend to convey that you're kind of being a little distant from the person, as opposed to putting your, I don't know how much of me you can see on the screen, but I have a chair here in my office with two arms on it. Or put your hands on your lap, but don't cross them. Those are some things I would mention for that question.
That's great. We have a question specifically related to online interviews. Maybe you can give us advice about the lighting, for example. Is it okay to use a desk lamp to focus the light on your face? Is it okay to use a background picture? What would you recommend in general?
Good question again. Actually, I don't know if you can tell this, but I'm using a desk lamp right now to illuminate me here on this interview. That's absolutely fine. You don't want to make it look like you're on a Broadway stage with all kinds of spotlights on you. But yes, you want to be seen. So you do want the lighting to be, I often say to folks, actually, when I meet with them, can you see me okay? And sometimes they said, well, no, I can. And so I will, so you can definitely use a light to make sure your face and your upper body is illuminated. There was another part of that question.
Should we use background picture?
That's it. Yeah, thank you. I would be careful about the background. Now, you can see behind me that I'm in my office. I have a couple of chairs behind me, a beautiful lamp, a few gifts and awards I've been given. So I have some of those things. And then my vertical blinds in my office are closed. As long as it's not something, of course, you don't want any inappropriate wall art behind you. You don't want to, now look at Nellie. Nellie is a very good example. She has a very nice, it looks like a wine color, burgundy color on the wall behind her, and that's it. Now, what that does is allow, you might sometimes be a little distracted looking at me because, at least in the beginning, because you're saying, oh, what's that? That looks like a chair. And but of course, after we get started, probably not. But in the case of Nellie, you can see Nellie, and that's it. The focus, what you want to do is to try to do your best to make sure that they're going to be able to focus on you while you're doing the virtual interview.
Thank you, Don. We have someone who is targeting US schools specifically. What are some interview etiquettes specific to US, if there is any?
That's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked. But, you know, honestly, I don't believe that what I've shared with you today would be any different than what I would share if you were interviewing at a institution in Europe or Asia or Africa, Australia, Latin America. I believe these tips, these suggestions, this format would probably be somewhat similar. As I've traveled around the world and done interviews with individuals or learned of individuals who were interviewing with me, but also with some other programs in Europe, the basic structure in my experience is the same. Good question.
Okay, then one last question, I promise.
Oh, that's okay. This is great.
Can you share a unique experience that you had during the course of your career? Something memorable that you remember even now?
Well, thank you. I guess I'm being interviewed.
Exactly.
That's a great way to end the meeting here. I'm going to share something that I don't often share, but I had the honest privilege of working with students I've been doing this now for 43 years, and in my experience in higher ed full-time for 28 years, I had a chance to work with students, and there was no greater joy, truly, than to see my students succeed. with that in mind, one time at Chicago Booth, I got a knock on my door, and when I opened it, a student was standing there from another country, not the United States, and they looked absolutely white with terror. They were absolutely, I was clear something was wrong. And I just motioned, I said, please come in, have a seat. They sat down. As soon as I shut my office door, this person began to weep uncontrollably. They were just weeping and weeping. And so I grabbed a tissue box that I kept in my office. I just put it on the table very gently. And I just said, just take your time. Nothing, that's what I said. And finally, they calmed down and shared with me an experience where they had done something they weren't supposed to do and had been caught. And they told me, if this news gets back to my family, I will be, and by the way, what they had done was not a horrible, horrible crime or anything like that. Please no. But this was for them. They said, if my family hears about this, I will be disinherited. And they started weeping all over again. And in the course of the next hour or two, I had an opportunity to comfort this individual, try to encourage them that I applauded them for coming to me, for being willing to share with me what happened. And we went back to the location where this inappropriate decision that they made had occurred, and spoke with the individuals involved. Long story short, the citation that had been written against this student was dropped, and it was never taken any further. There was an explanation made. I was there with them. It took about 3 weeks before this got all resolved. And of course, that information never went beyond the student in terms of at Booth School of Business. That information never went beyond that student and me. It wasn't shared with anyone else. And it was over. About a year later, when they graduated from Booth on graduation day, of course, I didn't know, or it was right before graduation. Here, unbeknownst to me, their family was there with them. They'd come in from out of the country to celebrate. And in between that time that I learned that this student was married and had a little baby. And that person and their spouse and the little baby came to my office and knocked on my door. And when I opened it, here were the three of them with a gift. And the student said, Dr. Don, you saved my life. I don't know what would have happened. And I will never forget that. I've had that opportunity over, maybe not quite as severe in every instance, but I've had that opportunity over and over and over again throughout my career. And to be able to watch students accomplish their goals and help them in whatever way I could has been rewarding beyond what any salary could ever provide me. I've told folks throughout my career, I mean, yes, I was paid well, especially after 28 years. You can imagine my salary was very good, but that's not what started me in this field or kept me in it. What kept me in it, and to this day, what keeps me in it, is the opportunity to help students on so many levels. It's such a privilege. That's a long story. Thank you for listening. And did we get a few more questions, Nellie, while I was talking, or do we? Because if we have a few more, I'm willing to try.
I think we covered most
Did
of
we
it.
cover them all?
Yeah, the rest you covered during your presentation.
All right.
So we're done, and we're
Okay.
very, very grateful for being here with us today and giving us these amazing tips. Once again, everyone, we're going to follow up with recording with more information. Stay in touch. Thank you, Don, very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.